Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. In fact, you are currently listening to episode number 264. And if you're wondering why the voice of the host might sound a little bit different, don't panic. Everything is fine with Mr. Gaudet. But as companies grow, we discover that CEOs become naturally quite busy. And preparing for a podcast sometimes takes a little longer than needed. So today, you have a new host for this episode, but don't worry, because I think you're going to like who one of my guests is. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the two gentlemen that will be helping me tackle today's episode title, which is Getting Started with Outbound. Drum roll, please. First guest. It's an easy one. Mr. Charles Gaudet, CEO of Predictable Profits. Charlie, welcome to your own podcast.
This is great. This is fun. I like this.
And also, it gives us great pleasure to welcome our second guest today, Mr. Jerson Milizzo. Jerson leads our outbound department here at Predictable Profits. Jerson, it's a pleasure to have you join us on today's episode.
Happy to be here, Joe.
Awesome. Well, before we get started, gents, let's just do a little bit of catch up because, as I mentioned, Charlie, you have been just extremely busy lately. Why don't you tell everybody where you've been and what you've been up to?
Well, just a couple of weeks ago, I was over at this event, this mastermind event. There's 7, 8, 9-figure entrepreneurs there, which is just extraordinary to be in that environment. We're talking about some people there are making over $35,000 every few minutes on one channel alone. So having conversations that nobody else on the planet is having, looking at what's currently working and not working, all the way into what the trends look like in the future, what should we be concerned about, and how do we solve for those trends in order to maintain our advantages.
Where was this, Charlie? You were gone for like a week, I think.
It was in Del Mar. The mastermind is known as MMT, Mastermind Talks. Some of the most inspiring, wonderful, brilliant people on the planet. It was such a gift to be there. I think it's my 5th or 6th event. Yeah, it's awesome.
We saw some of the images coming from the event, and if you're familiar with the industry or familiar with some of the members, the level of minds that are a part of that group is just extraordinary. So I'm sure you left with more ideas than what you entered with.
Yeah, I mean, it was cool. Every time I go there, I'm like, wait a minute, I've read your book. I've seen you on stage. I've bought your product. Everything from, I mean, heck, you guys see me like drinking this green drink, right? Well, that's, one of the guys that was there as well. And my protein powder, he was there as well. My pickleball rackets, yep, he was there as well. But half the software on my computer, yep, they're there too. And it was like, all these folks that I'm constantly doing business with, just on my own. Generally, I show up to this event and it's like, man, it's so cool.
How important is it for CEOs to engage in community and different groups like this?
Here's the problem. Most CEOs, they're alone at the top of their mountain, so to speak, right? And so what they do is they develop tunnel vision, right? They only see things from their experience and their context. And so it's just like they got blinders on and it's just tunnel vision. The reason why I'm constantly investing in these masterminds and surrounding myself with just wonderful people is because you go from tunnel vision to you've expanded your horizon and you begin to see possibilities and innovations and constraints, for that matter, that you never would have seen on your own because everybody's bringing in a different context. And every entrepreneur, if they really want to go to that next level in their business, they're going to get stuck until they begin to broaden that horizon. And whether that is a mastermind community, whether that's something like the Predictable Profits Board of Directors, which again has got 7, 8, even on occasion, a few 9-figure folks in there, it's that type of environment where you, believe it or not, end up learning more from others than you would even on your own. And
we can't emphasize the need for community enough, right? And Charlie, you're a part of some wonderful groups, and every single time you come back, you bring more wisdom. And then we get to attend some of these as well, so we can't say enough. I'm excited to introduce our other guest, Jerson, and dig into a little bit what you've been up to, Jerson. But Charlie, I can't let you slide without talking about the exciting announcement that we had this week in the world of a certain list.
A certain list.
Yeah, come on. So Charlie has been voted #1 as a marketing mind to follow in 2025. Did I butcher that? Was that the exact
Yeah,
title?
no, you're right. Number one sales and marketing leader to follow in 2025 by Digital Marketing News. I saw the list, and half of the people on that list were mentors of mine growing up in this world. And one in particular was texting me, like, what the heck? What is going on here? But again, it's just, I'm humbled by the entire experience. And now there's a lot of pressure on me. I got to make sure I fill those shoes.
Congratulations, Charlie. It makes sense why you're so busy and why today you've gifted me the opportunity to host today's podcast. But congratulations, that's a huge success.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I'd love to take the credit. My ego would anyway. But I think, Joe, you know better. And Jerson, the same thing. I mean, it's easy when you're CEO and you surround yourself with some really great team players because a team makes you look good, right? And so I wouldn't have gotten that if I just did it on my own, to be honest. Like, let's face it, like the results that we provide others, it's because we provide the results, not I provide the results. It's we provide the results, right? And so that's the only thing I don't like about lists like that is because it makes it seem like, I did it on my own, but the reality is, no, I did it because of the team, right?
Well, we're all very grateful that you're the face of this company, and we understand that it takes a team effort, hence why the strategy we're talking about today, right? But it's much deserved, Charlie, and we love seeing you at the top of these lists. So let's keep it going.
Together we're better, buddy.
Together we're better. Jason, it's not quite the top of the list, but you've had some pretty monumental things happen in your life recently as well. And I'll start with saying congratulations because you just welcomed what number child is this, Jason?
Number two.
Number two into the world. You are a crazy man. Congratulations. How is fatherhood going on the second time around?
It's still as wild as the first one.
Is it easier or harder?
Ooh, that's a tough question. It's almost the same in the level of hard. You know, the same sleepless nights, days for me.
Yeah, for those who are not aware, Jerson works a night shift working in Predictable Profits, has done for over 4 years now. And so I can only imagine, Jerson, what it's like to introduce another child into the world, but then work during the nighttime.
Oh, yeah.
You've supplied us with some incredible images of doing your job while baby in arm. And so we take our hat off to you, and we're very grateful that you've taken the time to jump on the podcast today.
You know what, Joe? It just dawned on me, though. I think we're onto something. We need to make sure that Jerson keeps producing babies because you notice his results have continuously improved since this has happened. I mean, we might be onto something here.
That's right. That's right. Well, let's jump into that subject, guys, because that's why we're here today, right? We're here to talk about getting started with Outbound. And I think for a lot of listeners, Outbound might be daunting, and I don't think it really needs to be. Hence why I've got you two geniuses to speak about that today. But Charlie, you often talk about Outbound not being a strategy, but being almost its own department. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think you often hear this rumor spread around the world where they say, outbound doesn't work for me, or outbound is dead, or all that other fun stuff, right? And the way that most people perceive outbound is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to scrape a list, or I'm going to get a software that's going to provide me with a list of names. I'm going to queue them up into email software program, maybe even use AI to do some sort of personalization. Then I'm going to press send, blast it out, and expect all these results. And when they don't get the results, they go, oh, outbound doesn't work. And then they only get the propaganda from other gurus that are trying to push some other platform or strategy to back them up. And that's where they're convinced. But, outbound is a category, much like inbound is a category. You have inbound marketing, and there's a whole slew of different strategies within inbound. Outbound is the same way. Outbound is a category, and there's a whole slew of other strategies that exist within outbound. And then outbound, the strategy is more than just sending a communication. There's so many different levels of outbound, from preheating to list selection to title selection to industry selection and so forth, that all plays a part that in some ways is just as important, maybe even sometimes more than the message itself.
One of our pillars of our program is breaking away from the reliance of word of mouth and referrals, right? The main source of the majority of businesses' early start when it comes to leads and opportunities. Why is adding outbound important, Charlie?
So inbound, you're waiting for people to say, I have a particular need. And then you're lucky enough for them to find you, right? So I have a need, and then I have to somehow find you, and then you get that inbound lead. Outbound is when you're actively reaching out to people to start a conversation. And again, the way that most people approach outbound, if you look at the different levels of awareness that exist, there's 5 big levels of awareness. Eugene Schwartz figured it out in his book, Breakthrough Advertising. The way that most messaging has worked is it only deals with the people who have a need right now. They're going to respond back and say, okay, let's talk. And that's why the response rates are going to be so low, because at any given point in time, it might be somewhere between 2 to 3, maybe 5 or so% of people that are going to be sitting there having the need in this moment right now. And a lot of times they just don't even realize that they have a problem. They just don't realize that your solution is going to be the best way to solve that problem. And so when you approach outbound a little bit differently, where ultimately you want to start a conversation, and I'm sure Jerson will get into this in a little bit more detail, why we created that strategy was as we looked at the different levels of awareness, as we looked at, what, the most important thing is to have a conversation, to build a relationship, to establish that trust, become more known before you even pitch them anything. You take people from a conversation of, I didn't even realize that was a problem. You mentioned word of mouth and referrals as an example. Like, a lot of people have built their business on the backs of hard work, word of mouth, and referrals, and they're making some good money. I mean, you can usually get to about 1 to 3 million that way, and they don't often think, well, that's a problem. And often they think, well, isn't that the way that you're supposed to do it? And then Jerson starts with the conversation. They begin to start thinking, wait a minute, I didn't realize that was a problem. Let me explore this a little bit deeper. And then they start going up those levels of awareness until ultimately they end up becoming clients.
It's probably really important because people can be running this strategy. I think there's a daunting aspect when people think about Bound, but as we'll open it up, there are ways that it is your easiest solution or your easiest next option beyond word of mouth and referrals if done right. And Jerson, I want to come to you real quick. You've been running our outbound campaigns here for 4 years at Predictable Profits, and then beyond that with other companies. Why do you think there is this misconception that outbound is maybe a lot harder than what it is?
Well, I think the misconception stems from not having the results that you want. And I think just to piggyback on what Charlie said, I think there are certain components to outbound that people just don't realize, or at least right off the bat, right? We've been doing this for a long time and we have learned our lessons kind of the hard way too. So what Charlie explained a few minutes ago is more on the mental map that everyone goes through as you implement some sort of, an outbound strategy or an outbound tactic. So there's a level of awareness, right, that happens in the brain. It's mental. And I think a lot of people also neglect that the other side of outbound is the emotional part of it. And what I'm referring to is the know, like, and trust process. I say it's emotional thing because it's something that you feel. And when you do outbound wrong, the opposite is also true. From know, like, and trust, it could lead to, it starts with ignore, then annoyance, then anger. And that's when you start to go downhill. And we all know that when people don't trust you, even though they're fully aware that you have the best solution, they're fully aware that they have a problem, they're still not going to do business with you. They're going to find someone else that they trust. So I think it's that component of outbound that needs to be dialed in, as well as the levels of awareness if you want to make outbound work for you.
So that brings up a fantastic segue into getting into how do people get outbound started, right? And because I think before we start talking about the strategy of outbound, we need to talk about potentially the two strategies that come before outbound that, as you guys have alluded to, if not done properly, leads to this misconception of it being difficult because of the bad results that get from your typical outbound strategies, right? So if I can take us two strategies deeper to start with, Charlie, can you kick us off by talking about how important the identification of your super consumer is when initially building an audience to target for outbound?
Sure. When you look at the results that we've generated over the years, our results are very uncommon compared to, the industry as a whole. And it's become more and more aware of the fact that our results are uncommon because our approach is oftentimes completely contradictory to what we've learned over the years. And one of the things that we're often taught very early on is know your ideal client profile, or your ICP. Know your ideal client profile. But that ideal client profile is designed on this idea of who do you want as your ideal client? In other words, you don't know your ideal client, but who do you want as your ideal client? And so you come up with this profile. It's like, okay, this is what I want. And that's great when you're a startup or you have, few number of customers or clients. But then all of a sudden, now you start collecting data and you begin to notice something. You see that, okay, there's a certain profile of my clients that fit a certain industry, that fit a certain revenue level, that have a certain type of problem. Those are the people that will spend more money with me. They'll stay with me longer. They're going to refer other people over to me. And they have the highest lifetime customer value. You deliver the best results. It's just the easiest, more fun people to work with. And they actually become your super consumer. So if you look at the 80-20 rule, eventually when you have thousands, you might be looking at the top maybe 5% or 4%. But when you have a limited number, the first thing you're going to do is 80-20 rule. Who's the top 20% of my clients that are generating the most amount of money, that stay the longest with us, blah, blah, blah. And as you go through that, now what do they have in common? Now you've upgraded from your ideal client profile to now what you have is a super consumer. These are the best people. Because if all you did is you look at the 80-20 rule and you said, if I just now filled my roster with the same makeup of those people, the top 20%, what would that do to my income, my revenue, and my profits? And for most people, it would almost instantly double, triple, quadruple their business if they just focused in on that. And so you have to be really, really crystal clear of who that super consumer is. And then when you reach out to them, I mean, look, we only have 24 hours in the day. Actions plus resources equal goal. You only have so much on the action. So you want to make sure that, the bigger your market, just hone in on that super consumer and you're going to get better results in the long run. Just wanted to add one thing too, just to back up for a second. We talk about inbound, outbound. So people understand the impact of this. A lot of people, they try paid marketing. Our highest return on effort, our highest return on investment is with outbound by a lot because it converts high, they stay longer, and it doesn't require a lot of investment to do outbound right.
But that's why also, Charlie, maybe the super consumer identification is important, right? Because if we're going to adopt another strategy to get beyond word of mouth and referrals, we want to make sure that the action we take ends up with the greatest results possible, right? So the super consumer has to be the start, or that identification of your super consumer has to be the beginning of any type of outbound strategy, right?
Yeah. As we've determined, like nobody can do marketing. Like that's not the thing. Like you can't do marketing. People think, well, wait a minute, I thought I was doing marketing. No, that's like saying I do doctoring. Like you can't do doctor. Like you can't do that, right? Marketing is a function. It's a function of how you create, capture, and nurture demand. And so when you look at outbound, like we're also recognizing that we're not shortcutting that process at all, right? So we have that super consumer, but then it still comes down to how are we creating, capturing, and nurturing that demand. And so I'm sure Jerson will talk about that when it comes to how he's creating demand, because the other rule we have is you never want to sell a cold lead, right? And that's where outbound again goes wrong is send an email, get them on the phone, try to close them, and their close rate at best is maybe 10%. And they're like, oh, it's wrong.
Well, you're putting the golf ball on the tee nicely for Jerson there, Charlie, because once we've identified the super consumer, we spoke about the two strategies. That's the first. The second strategy that comes in is something we call preheating, right? And to your point, Charlie, this is how we avoid reaching out to someone who is quote unquote cold. Now, Jerson, if I can turn the microphone to you, you run our preheating strategy, and I'd love to learn more about what that is from you. But if you can also touch on how identification of platform is now also crucial once you've identified your super consumer, because at some point we have to reach out to the prospect, and the platform that you do this from is as important as the preheating process, right?
That is correct. You gotta hang out where your prospects hang out. So platform is important. And so yeah, the preheating strategy is necessary so that you don't talk, you don't sell cold leads. And the idea is going back to what I said earlier, is really just facilitating know, like, and trust. Human beings gravitate to human beings. And that's how, relationships, that's how trust is built. And preheating is a means to do that. And I don't know how deep we're going to go technical when it comes to preheating, but the idea here is to ease into your prospect's radar through natural human touch points. And if we are to become specific with the platform here, let's say LinkedIn, it looks like, starting with engaging with their content, following their profiles, giving them dopamine hits through your engagement, and just facilitate that know, like, and trust process naturally.
Charlie, Jerson mentioned that LinkedIn has been our platform of choice, but we've experimented with just about every platform out there with mixed results. And I think this will be very dependent on the company and, to Jerson's point, where their prospect hangs out, right? For us, it's been largely LinkedIn. But Charlie, on any platform that they pick, why is preheating so important? Jerson mentioned the dopamine hits, but in your words, why is the preheating a mandatory stage of outbound?
The platform, by the way, Jerson can also speak to the fact that in the 4 years that we've worked together, it's almost like every few months, the buyer is always evolving and changing. So we're changing with the buyer. And that's every industry across the board, right? So whatever you think it is now, like, you have to be agile, and that becomes a superpower. The other thing is that, and that's another reason why you talk about community being really awesome, because in the communities, you begin to understand, like, and see what's going on with all the other folks in the community side of things. On the preheating side, we talk about know, like, and trust, right? And we also talked about the fact that you got to create, capture, and nurture that demand, right? And so as he's going through that entire process, unbeknownst to themselves, people are beginning to create this interest. They went from, I have no interest in buying, for example, if we talk about us, like business coaching, I have no interest in buying business coaching. All of a sudden they become open to the idea. And then as they become open to the idea, and Jerson goes through this process and has this conversation and so forth, that's why it's one of our top conversion sources right now from people who normally wouldn't even have been interested in business coaching in the beginning. And so the level of conversation changes. As Jerson talked about, you're giving them these dopamine hits, you're giving them stuff, right? Giving them a like, giving them comments. And if I leave a meaningful comment on your profile, Joe, if I'm prospecting you and I leave a meaningful comment on your LinkedIn, what are you more likely going to do for me?
Do something back.
Yeah, you're probably either going to, reply back, right? More likely going to check out my profile and whatnot. But when you reply back, now we're already having a conversation. Think about the dynamic. I see you everywhere, right? 4 magic words. I see you everywhere. Now you're engaging with my stuff. You're giving me a whole bunch. We've engaged in a mini conversation online that gives me an opportunity to reach out with an invitation.
Which I think it's important to say is not the actual outbound strategy itself, right? But is how preheating can be effective to, like, trick somebody into talking in the conversation and starting outbound without even doing it. So I know we'll come to the actual strategy of outbound and starting the conversation here soon, but preheating, if done well, can naturally lead to conversations before we've even started the strategy, right?
Right. I mean, think about this. Like, for anybody that's in a relationship, all businesses is a relationship. If it's something as simple as you walk into Starbucks for the first time and you see somebody, good looking girl over there, and you walk up and you go, hey, can I get your number? Can we go out for coffee? If she's never seen you before, she's going to be very apprehensive and standoffish and being like, But if you've shown up at the Starbucks at the same time that she has every morning, and you just say hi and you become more familiar, and then this might go on for, a few days, maybe even a couple weeks. And you say, hey, could I get your number? I'd love to be able to, take you out for dinner or coffee or whatnot. The probability of her saying, oh, that'd be great, goes way, way up, because she's now familiar with you. You're not a stranger anymore. She's seen you a few times and she starts to feel some trust and some comfort.
You said it earlier, the term "I see you everywhere," Charlie, and it is again one of the pillars of our program and what we believe adds to sales. But preheating strategy will also run alongside retargeting, right? So not only have we got the community and the connection being built and the chance for somebody to see us liking their stuff and then checking us out, but they are also probably at that point added to a LinkedIn audience at the top of the funnel, right? And they might be starting to see some of our top of funnel ads in their social medias and on other platforms. So before we've even engaged in an outbound strategy, the preheating and retargeting is making sure that we are familiar to these people, right?
Oh, absolutely. There was another agency that we work with, and his response rate was 0.5%. 0.5%. Most of the time when outbound goes wrong, we say, all right, you're not doing the preheating. So that's one easy way to grade that lift. So we said, let's do this preheating. And I said to him, look, the four magic words, I see you everywhere. That needs to happen. So he got a CSV file of all his prospects that he's reaching out to. And this particular gentleman, he's always all in. And so he turned around and he uploaded the list. It was back then it was Twitter, but Twitter and Meta and LinkedIn and AdRoll and Google Display Network and Taboola, like any place that will go ahead and take his ads, he went ahead and did it. Doesn't cost a lot of money. It's usually $10 per 10,000 per platform, right? And so his lead rate in short order, changing nothing else, went from 0.5% to 5%. Think about that for a minute. 0.5% to 5%. He went from, we don't have enough leads. What do we need to do? To the conversation we had was, we're getting too many phone calls. We're getting too many opportunities. We can't scale this quick. What do we need to do now?
No, you're right, Charlie. Even in our client conversations, the first thing that we will reference when people say, I'm struggling with our outbound results is, well, let's take a look at your preheating. And so often you've investigated a company, Charlie, and discovered that they stopped doing it a couple of weeks ago, and that has been the dip in results, or has been why it's not changed. Justin, how long would you recommend that somebody does preheating?
2 weeks is optimal based on our data.
And how do you go about organizing those efforts and keeping on top of those efforts?
So, well, we love to keep things simple, Joe. So we love our spreadsheets, right?
It can be that easy, right? It can be as easy as a spreadsheet.
Could be that easy, and then we could just organize a lead list on the spreadsheet and then just engage with them on a daily cadence, 50 to 100 profiles a day, or even 150 if time permits. But yeah, we could it could be as simple as that, or it could be leveraging tools like Sales Navigator. Sales Navigator has an awesome way to build a that allows you to build a lead list, and it has a filter where you can see lead shares. These are the posts from your leads, and then you can do your engagement from there. So all of these activities lead to the preheating effort. And I guess we say this a lot, Joe, and I feel like we've said I see you everywhere enough, but I think for our listeners, just to really, lock it in, the idea of preheating, or a good litmus test, if you will, so that you can evaluate if your preheating efforts are working for you. You got to get your prospects to the stage of I see you everywhere. That's the ultimate goal of preheating, whatever that might be, whichever platform you may be using. So that would be a good standard or target to strive for when preheating.
Yeah, to be familiar with you by the time that we get the conversation going.
If your prospects aren't saying that to you, to Jerson's point, then you're not leaning in enough. I mean, they will literally get on the phone with you and say, I see you everywhere.
No, you really will. Okay, gentlemen, we've targeted our super consumers, right? We found the platform that they're hanging out on. We have the list. We've put them in the spreadsheet, and we're starting our 2 weeks of preheating. Let's talk about the actual outbound strategies themselves. And there's a few different ones that we could talk about that we run on a regular basis. But instead of focusing on just one, I'd like to focus on the characteristics that make any outbound strategy really, really effective. And Jerson and Charlie, I think we'd all agree that that initial message, no matter the strategy that follows, is really, really crucial, right? Charlie, can you talk to me, and then Jerson, I'd like to get your thoughts as well on some of the characteristics of that opening statement and what makes an effective opening statement to a outbound prospect that's been preheated.
First, if it looks like marketing and it smells like marketing, or rather, if it looks like sales and smells like sales, then that's the first way you're going to turn people off, right? So your first rule, don't make it look like sales or marketing. The second thing is, what are you able to do that gives you that opportunity to further that relationship? Again, like if you have a hard time imagining it, but yourself when you're forging personal relationships, like you have to just like work your way in by giving them something and starting conversations. It's all about just starting a conversation, not getting them on the phone. That's a mistake, trying to get somebody on the phone right off the bat. It's starting a conversation. Now, that conversation may lead to one, like the market research campaign, right? We're looking to invite top CEOs and so forth into a conversation where we're then going to feature them in a research report and so forth. Like there's a whole back end campaign for that. We're not selling them at all. In fact, there's no pitch. We're listening to them and they're sharing. And then many times throughout that conversation, either they say, "Oh, this is interesting. Is this something that you guys could help me with?" And that's great. Or Jerson will say, "You happen to mention that you are struggling with so and so, or with this. We just so happen to have a framework that can solve for that. I don't know, would it make sense to put you on the phone with somebody that can help you?" And then they'll go ahead and then they'll do that. But at no point should they ever feel like they're being sold, because you're serving the entire time. Our relationships, I mean, Jerson, when you get on the phone with somebody, right? Does it almost feel like you're talking to a friend?
100%. There's
Yeah.
definitely brand recall. There's definitely that sense of familiarity with who I am, the researcher from Predictable Profits.
And I know you were really nervous when we first asked you to jump on the phone, because you were probably expecting a similar conversation to what you've done in the past with Outbound, when you'd get on the phone with people and they would feel cold, they'd be reserved, they'd be almost like testing you, like, "Why are you wasting my time? Like, let's just get to the point." And it was like, they're very hard conversations to have. But that doesn't happen to you anymore, does it?
Nope.
What would be some of the key characteristics, do you believe, of the initial outreach that make it successful?
Initial characteristics, I really want to lean in on Charlie's answer earlier, Joe. Whatever you're going to say, whatever your business is, whatever you're offering, don't pitch, start a conversation instead. Start a conversation, ask an open-ended question. Or if you're just starting the outreach, maybe even, a close-ended question to where you limit their choices, right? This or that, as simple as that. Make it easy, make it smooth for them to respond. Don't make them think too hard just to get back to you. Give options, like when you're asking.
Yeah, I think that's been a really effective one for us, right? Charlie hit the nail on the head when he said if it smells like sales, then people are going to quickly foil it, right? And then I think you're right, Jason, as well, that if you can outreach and provide an easy option for a reply, right, to begin with, an open-ended, a closed-ended question, something really easy where they don't have to think, they don't have to type much, you will increase your chances of getting that initial reply, which is that next barrier if they're familiar with us, right, in opening a conversation. So I think between the two of you, that's exactly right. Charlie, you got something to add?
Oftentimes we'll get people that say, "Well, our Outbound doesn't work for us. We've tried it." And we've already addressed the preheating part, right? Which is one of the core areas. But the one thing we skipped over a little bit, you talked about the super consumer, right? The reason why that is super important is because Jerson can tell you firsthand that we will have a different response rate based on the industry and based on the title and based on the size of the company. And so if you ran the exact same strategy that we're talking about right now, but you ran it in the wrong industry with the wrong title, we may come to the same conclusion that, you know what, it just actually doesn't work. But we have enough data from our super consumer to say that our message works really well with this particular super consumer who fits this particular profile and whatnot, that when we reach out to that profile, our response rates are huge. Now, I also want to put context into this, because most people will turn around and they'll say, "Okay, well, what can I expect with Outbound?" And if they get like maybe one call per day, they're doing backflips. But just the other week, Jerson had 12 appointments set in 1 week. Like, most people would give their left arm for something like that. They're hoping that if they could do that an entire month, that would be like a massive victory for them. So when we talk about that this strategy is different and it produces different results, like, you tell me right now another strategy out there that is generating that many appointments, and most people couldn't tell you one. But it's not as easy as we're just going to load up a bunch of emails and send it out and boom. Like, because we wouldn't be getting that response rate.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point, Charlie. Bringing that super consumer back into the picture, you're right. The pain points are going to be known from the beginning, right? So that initial outreach can be even more effective if you can then relate it back to the super consumer, to your point, who you're reaching out to, the platform, the title, the revenue of the company, right? And I think over time, you do find the nuances that work well for a particular subsection of your super consumer.
Yeah.
Right, I think that's a really valid point.
You just brought somebody in, a new client to our board of directors program,
Uh-huh.
and she went through the market research campaign how long ago?
October of last year, yes.
So October of last year, right?
Which is an outbound strategy of ours, by the way, called the market research campaign. It's one of our outbound strategies.
Right. So let's think about that for a minute. Jerson reached out to her in October of last year. With most outbound strategies, if somebody said no back in October, for the most part, that was a no. No means no, and that's it, and it ends. But that market research campaign left such an impression, and he built such a relationship and created so much value through that conversation that that person became a buyer many months later. And we've brought people in that have become buyers over a year later, right? Because the relationship is memorable, the impression is significant, the value is exchanged. And now it's not a matter of, if I'm going to do business with you. Most of the time, it's when am I going to do business with you?
Yeah. And Charlie, you lead us really nicely then to the latter half of an outbound strategy, which is that conversion. And as you referenced there, our whole goal with our outbound campaigns are to provide value, value, value to the point that the prospect is asking us to sit down to talk more, right? And I want to touch on the fact that if we've done the targeting, we've done the preheating, we've started a conversation, we're providing and focusing on value. Eventually, we do want to bring this to a conversion, but if we do not do that within the strategy itself, you are still adding to a swimming pool that is filling up with opportunities that months later is going to start overflowing, right? So let's focus on that conversion point. And I know with different strategies for us, there's different points of quote unquote conversion. We alluded to one earlier, which is that if they have a particular problem that we've been able to uncover in baseline value conversations, we will offer to get on a call that we can then quite often manipulate into demonstrating our product and how it solves for that problem, right? Another one you mentioned, Charlie, our market research campaign does a different approach where we actually involve them into a report and a roundtable, get through that, and then we have a conversion point afterwards. But I really want to drill in on the fact, Charlie, that outbound is something that you continue to do and is more of a discipline over and over, a little bit like sales, but will give you results and conversion points in all sorts of ways at all sorts of different times through the year, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the thing is anytime somebody jumps on the phone, with you or anybody for a sales conversation, if you want to turn them off quickly, then immediately put your sales hat on and make it sound, go back to being a salesperson, because they're going to be like, wait a minute, whoa, when did you change? Like, you were really cool up until now. And now all of a sudden, like, this doesn't feel right. Like, you've changed. So even the sales conversation has to be structured in such a way that you're continuing that value chain and that relationship chain. Because through the sales conversation, they should never feel like they're being sold. And more times than not, they're actually asking us, so what would it be like to work with you? And then they're actually saying, they're tipping their cards and they're saying, you know what? This has been great. I want more. Like, how do I get more of this? How do I get more of you, more of this strategy? Because if I've gotten this much from you and I haven't even paid you yet, my God, when I start paying you, like, what's this going to look like? It's a natural flow. Again, a lot of people, they get this gotcha moment where, and we've all been there. We get on the other side of a sales call and we think we're going in for one reason and they start pitching us and it feels dirty. And to Jerson's point earlier about annoying and anger, like, you get angry you get upset, like, because it was like this gotcha moment. Like, I didn't get on this call for this, right? So it's an entire process all the way through that is governed on this idea of, you know, like, and trust, right? So they know you through the whole time. They like you because you've been cool and you've been serving them and you've been helping them to solve a problem and creating more clarity and so forth. And they trust you because you haven't let them down up to this point. Their expectations of the experience they're going to have when they start talking with you match their reality. And you want to keep that expectation and the reality all the way through. The moment you break the expectation, or the moment you break their reality, rather. So they're coming in because you promise them this, but then you break their reality and now it feels like sales. They don't trust you anymore. You just broke the triad and you're not going to get the sale.
We can't stress this point enough. And if you outbound, again, we mentioned at the beginning, but outbound is without doubt our most effective strategy at bringing in new business and converting business into raving fans. Some people will convert very quickly during the outbound process if the problem was big enough for them. Some people, as we mentioned, will come back in 365 days, or sorry, they will be in our atmosphere 365 days from an outbound strategy and then convert a year later into the actual pipeline, right? Outbound is 100% a strategy that, if just done well and executed with discipline, over time, it will absolutely bring you results. Some quick, some more into the future, but it's that filling up of the swimming pool on a weekly and daily basis that will lead to the most successful results with outbound. So if I can go into that part next, Jerson, I want to talk about somebody who's thinking about starting this and is a little bit intimidated, right? I don't think outbound, when it comes to our methodology, has to be overwhelming in terms of numbers. We are no longer funneling 10,000 email addresses into an email list and trying to reach out all of them with a personal line, right? It's very different. So for somebody wanting to start an outbound strategy with the super consumer, with preheating, and then into outbound, what type of numbers should people be looking at on terms of a daily outreach? And then if you can give some reference to the time that could take, that would be extremely helpful as well.
Yeah, so numbers, a good number to strive for will be 40 messages a day, whether you're doing that on LinkedIn or email. 40 quality conversations started a day. And Joe, you'll notice I use the word conversation started as a metric because that's what you're striving for. You want to start conversations, and I think we really need to embed that into our metrics, just so we don't lose the focus of, this is what outbound is about. It's starting conversations. And not to go back to what we were talking about earlier, but I think a lot of people go for the kiss too early. From my experience, the most famous words, the moment that you've started that conversation, are the words, by the way. You're already cool. You're having this conversation, and then all of a sudden, oh, by the way, would you be interested? And then that's where you lose the prospect. So I guess, if someone's going to do outbound, you've already done the preheating and you've already done the initial conversation starter. You're already having a conversation. The next stage that you would want to take the prospect into would be the consumption stage. And that is where you provide value, let them consume your content. And this is the part where they stay most of a journey, consumption, before then it leads to conversion, because consumption drives conversion.
Charlie, you've run outbound campaigns for us before Jerson came here 4 years ago, alongside Jerson, and then for hundreds of other clients. What could you say in terms of the lift that could be expected if somebody wants to start their outbound strategy?
So we've seen this with other clients where they've hired like really, really expensive members of the team because they figured in order to make this work, like, it requires a lot of high labor and skill. That doesn't take anything away from Jerson because Jerson is our unicorn. He's super high labor and whatnot. But Jerson can vouch for this. He's helped train other people in this methodology that, they may be interns, or, they may be overseas talent, which has a different price tag than that of the United States. And I would put Jerson up against any salesperson at any level, at any number of years of experience, you name it. And it's not only because Jerson is a rock star, but it's because Jerson has the formula. Like it's very formulaic. Like it's just, I know what to do. Boom, 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 boom. And again, I want to give credit where credit's due. Like I helped to create the shell of the market research campaign and the methodology and like, here, let's go ahead and do this. And because I do want to make sure that Jerson gets, a lot of credit with this, because then Jerson was able to say, okay, I'm tracking my data meticulously. Here's what's working. Here's what's not working. And we've been working together for 4 years, and that's been refined, over a period of time. So I bring that up because to answer your question, when we look at the people that have tried this before, they go ahead, they hire somebody, they say, go ahead, go do this. They don't track any data, they don't track any numbers, they don't have a real strategy. They do this, and then they don't focus on trying to optimize or improve. They don't have the data. They just kind of throw one thing at the wall, and then if it doesn't stick, then they assume it doesn't work. But everything has to go through this process. And, there's little variables. If you're going to be using LinkedIn, which we love and it's awesome, what does your LinkedIn profile look like? This is another client. I don't mean to laugh, but it actually is almost laughable. I went to their LinkedIn profile and they didn't even have an image. It was the default like silhouette of somebody, like there was no image. They had like an oceanscape banner. There was nothing there. So if I get a message and I click on the LinkedIn profile and I look at this person, I'm like, well, that ends it. No matter how good you do with everything else, it's like, so there's the little factors that kind of go into it.
One thing I will point out for anybody looking to start this is that we are a big promoter of you shouldn't hire to bring somebody else in to figure this out. Companies like us have the strategies, have the step-by-step guides, but you really need to figure out what messaging works for yourself. And I'll just highlight one of our favorite customers, Lindsay, right? Lindsay, 2 or 3 months ago, started her first outbound strategy. Lindsay set a number between 30, I think 20, 30, 40 people a day that she wanted to target, preheat, and then after preheating, start to outreach. She managed to close, I think, 2 or 3 clients in her first couple of months of starting Outbound, found out the secret spot to where the messaging worked. And I think to give some reference to time, I think she'd probably dedicated an hour to an hour and a half a day to work on this in the morning. And then after that, she is now hiring for a VA to come in to take that initial part, because as you said, Charlie, someone like Jerson, who's been doing this a while now, has got the process down. And really what it is a process with some added genius on top. Now, we've got that unicorn in Jerson. We had that genius with you crafting the strategies, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago sometimes when it comes to Outbound. But any CEO looking to start can get this going with about an hour to an hour and a half a day, figure out the messaging, and then absolutely bring in a VA to help scale a strategy that will produce results over time, right?
And that strategy was designed using another core concept of ours called the OSI method. So anytime like we put something together, anytime you launch something, it starts with, okay, we launched it, now optimize. And it's just, understanding and putting metrics and tracking that data and removing all the guesswork. And you quickly know, okay, this works. So let's lean in, do more of what's working. And, and this is what doesn't work. And that's why like super consumer, like break it down so you can track like, okay, here's the title, here's the demographic, and, here's this working. And if you use a different market, track separate data. Well, I'm also going to study, this industry and this and see how they compare, back and forth. Look at the ads that you're running as you're doing this preheating and get an idea of, okay, like what does the data look like on some of those ads? Largely, consumption-based strategies. And this is where it gets boring. Part of the reason why we work with 7 and 8 figure companies is because they're done chasing that shiny penny and they realize that the shiny penny strategy doesn't work. One of the many reasons why for most people, we're the only coaches that they're aware of that specialize in working with 7 and 8 figure companies. Not only because the skill level and experience level has to change, but like to tell people on a podcast, you have to track your numbers is boring. It's not sexy. People are like, I don't want to do that. I just want to go back and chase the shiny penny. But when you track your numbers, and Joe, this is your zone of genius. You track the numbers so well that if we need to bring in more money, what screw to turn. You're like, oh, okay, we need to do this. We need to stop doing this. We need to improve this. And it's like, I would be remiss if I didn't say outbound is, you'll have the process, you have the strategy, you have the whole formula. But let's not forget too that, you know, optimization, systemization, innovation, right? Optimize first and really kind of dial that in. If you dial in the optimization, you remove the guesswork, you know what's working. If setting, I don't know, 12 appointments a week doesn't sound exciting for you, then we're probably having the wrong conversation.
That's
You know,
right.
but that has to happen
Yeah.
through an
Yeah.
understanding of like the whole process.
I'll touch on the numbers, Charlie, but to buy you guys some time to wrap this episode, I'm going to ask both of you an essential of outbound and an essential to avoid. An essential avoidance that people should have in outbound, right? My words probably didn't do myself any favors there. But while I give you guys a couple of moments to think about those two things, I will just touch on the data. If you've listened to this podcast at all in the past, you will know that we are very data driven. We make what we call data backed decisions. And outbound is absolutely no different. A great example would be somebody pointing out that they think they need new leads. But if we point out that if you change your conversion rate by 10%, it actually has a bigger impact on your bottom line than if you bring in new leads. That same type of concept applies to outbound. Some of the data that we love to track is number of conversations started, the amount of people in our preheating lists, the reply rate. And Jerson, I actually checked this last night in preparation for today, and your latest reply rate is just under 50%, which is incredible. Woo! Where it started at, which was somewhere around, I think, 20, 30% when I began 2 or 3 years ago. So think about that, guys. Jerson will reach to 40 people a day on one profile, mind you, for us. He runs multiple profiles now, and just under 50% of them are replying in a positive way. So reply rate is a massive one for us to track. And then we, of course, track the amount of people that reply positively to the amount of people that ended up officially entering the pipeline or attending a workshop or the desired CTA for that outbound strategy once we've provided value and the client is asking us for the next point of conversion, right? Okay, I should have given you guys enough time there. Charlie, I'm going to start with you. What is an essential of outbound and what is something essential to avoid?
Got it. And I go back to all our client conversations, right? And I would say that I'm going to piggyback off what you said on the data point. We'll look at, is this an activity issue or an ability issue, right? So if you're not performing where you need to go, like the first thing we look at is the activities. It's a full stop. If you're not doing the activities that are required to make this successful, that only means that the number of people that you're reaching out to on a consistent basis, but are you doing the preheating, right? Like that's part of it. Are you doing the preheating? Are you reaching out to the right person? Are you tracking, because you're going to test different messages, to your point, for the reply rate? Like, are you tracking those messages? And as you're going through all that other stuff, if the activity passes, then you got to go, okay, then it might be an ability issue, right? And that's when you have to determine, okay, well, they're following the process, they're doing this, but for whatever reason, like there's an ability issue, and that helps to identify, do you have the right person, in the right seat? But more times than not, especially with a strategy like this, if they're following the template, if they're following the strategy, if they're following the playbook, and those activities are there, then they're going to get the results.
What would be something essential to avoid?
It's actually take it out of your mind that it doesn't work for you or your industry. I've yet to see a situation where it doesn't work. If it doesn't work, the only thing that means is your approach isn't working. It doesn't work as a general. Your approach doesn't work. But there is a different approach that can work.
Love that, Charlie. Thank you. Jerson, something essential and something essential to avoid.
Something essential for outbound is momentum. You really got to build that momentum, and it starts with preheating, as we've already talked about. Build the momentum, facilitate know, like, and trust. What's essential to avoid? Just know this. Know, like, and trust could go the opposite way. Ignore, annoyance, anger. So build that momentum from preheating. And when you did that, you have your systems in place, you have your templates, you're already preheating. Converse first before you try to convert.
And I'm going to just piggyback on what he said too on the momentum side. Another way to word that is consistency. As Jerson starts over the first few weeks of a brand new campaign, response rates are going to be lower on a brand new campaign. But then all of a sudden, as he continues going day after day after day, all of a sudden it's like boom, because not everybody checks their email or replies the same day they get it. Some people, or their LinkedIn the same day they get it. Sometimes it's going to be a few days or a few weeks or whatnot. I mean, I went into my inbox the other day and I'm like, Jerson, whoa, like what happened? Like it was flooded. Like there was tons of messages in there because he's consistent across the board. Now it's just like tons. He can't even get through to all of them in just one day.
That's absolutely right. We cannot stress enough, everybody who's listening, how this is one of our favorite strategies to add inside of a company looking to get beyond word of mouth and referrals. Outbound works if done well. And if having up to 20 conversations a day, if setting up to 10 to 15 calls a week sounds like something that you'd be interested in, then we encourage everybody to reach out to us at Predictable Profits and ask us about the various outbound strategies that we have that can be implemented at your company. Gentlemen, we're out of time. Charlie, I thank you so much for being a guest on your own podcast. It was a pleasure to step into your seat today. Once again, if everybody is interested in learning more, head on to www.predictableprofits.com, where you'll find a whole host of ways to get in touch with us or to buy our book. For everybody listening, thank you for being here. Until next time, over and out.